Hey everyone, before we get started, we just wanted to mention that we were invited to be part of a really cool video interview with Ken over at Sledgehammer Horror for his My First Horror Movie series. And if you are interested in learning more about the first experiences Joseph and I both had as children with horror films, please check it out. The link is posted below. Thanks.
That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Secrets We Keep, the third film directed by Yuval Adler, which will be released on digital on demand September 18th, 2020, courtesy of Bleecker Street.
This person has done other movies?
Mm-hmm.
Like what?
Two. His first film, Bethlehem, I've never seen, but I did see The Operative, which was... I saw that in Berlin. It was out of competition. Diane Kruger plays a Mossad. She's recruited as a Mossad agent, but plays out very predictably. So yeah, this was written by Ryan Covington, who I'm not as familiar with.
This film is set in the late 50s.
I think based on the references to Sleeping Beauty and North by Northwest, 1959.
In like any town, USA,
Mm-hmm.
we find what's her name? Noomi Rapace.
Rapace.
Noomi Rapace. Her character's name is
Maja.
Maja. So Maja is married to a gentleman named
Lewis, played by Chris Messina.
He's a physician, and she works in his office with him.
Mm-hmm.
So we start the film with them just at work, lovely day. She, the next day, before she goes to work, her husband asks her to like run some errands. So while she's at the dry cleaners, she sees a man she's looking at like a mirror, like in her reflection behind her, and sees like a man walking by, and it looks like she sees a ghost. Mm-hmm. So she runs outside, follows the man all the way to his job.
I think his house the first time.
To his house.
Yeah.
And so she recognizes him.
Mm-hmm.
Cut to her at like the hardware store buying like some supplies.
A murder kit.
A murder kit. And then we see her at like a factory waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where this man works. This man is played by Joel Kinnaman.
Mm-hmm.
His character's name...
I forget who he says he was. Carl. She knows him as Carl, but Thomas maybe or something.
So Carl, she thinks Carl is... So Maja was living in Romania. She's Romanian.
Mm-hmm. Her family were Roma, the Gypsies.
The Nazis invaded.
Well, Romania
Allowed the Nazis.
joined allegiances with the Nazis in World War II, so they freely gave up their people that were put in camps.
So Maja explains later that much of her family were exterminated.
And she survived 2 years with her sister in a camp.
She survived and she believes that Carl, the man she saw walking by the dry cleaners 5,000 miles away 15 years later, is the man who like sexually assaulted, tortured her and her sister and killed her sister. Mm-hmm. So her plan is to do something with him. So she's waiting outside of his job at this factory. You know, the quitting time comes, he's walking out. She pretends her car is broken down and asks him for help. Mm-hmm. And he agrees to assist her. He obviously doesn't recognize her. He goes into her trunk to try to find like a tool or a part. And this bitch hits him dead center in the head with a hammer. Like broad daylight.
Yeah.
Knocks him out, puts him in the trunk, ties him up, and drives him to like a gravesite that she's dug up. Mm-hmm. Seemingly with the intention to kill him and bury him. Mm-hmm. So she dumps him in the grave and she says like, you know, acknowledge who you are, and he won't do it. Because he's like, I don't know who you're talking about, but that's not me. Mm-hmm. So she puts him back in the trunk and takes him home. When she gets home, good old Lewis is there upset because she forgot to pick up her son from school. She didn't run any of her errands and she's acting weird. Mm-hmm. So she explains to her husband, because he didn't know her history in the camps, her sister being murdered. So she explains all that, and then she goes, and the man who did it's in the trunk of my car. So of course, like things escalate very quickly because they take Carl into the house. Lewis is apprehensive because he doesn't know what to do with this man. They question him. Lewis initially is not satisfied that this is the man who, abused his wife and killed her sister, who he didn't even know existed. But we spend a couple of days with Carl in the basement. Lewis ends up going to work the next day to try to find his file. And he's like, I found his file. He was born in Sweden. I don't know what you're talking about. He's not German. Switzerland, sorry. Of note, that first night that Carl's in the basement, he's able to escape. And he almost gets out the front door, but his hands are tied, so he can't quite unlock it. But he screams. And it's like 5 a.m. So one of the neighbors comes out. So Maja has to go out there and kind of calm everyone down. But the next day, or a few days later, the sheriff shows up at their house while Carl is still locked up in the basement because Carl's wife reported him missing.
Played by Amy Seimetz.
And they want to question Maja because she was the other person who heard the noise. But while the sheriff is there with the neighbor and the wife, Lewis is downstairs with Carl, grilling him. And the sheriff's like, where's your husband? He's not here. And then all of a sudden, Lewis walks up. So that was a tense moment because obviously they weren't going to catch her then because the movie was only halfway through. But the sheriff leaves. But Maja decides she's going to befriend the wife to try to get more details. So she works, she wiggles her way in, and over the course of some days, they build a rapport. And ultimately, the wife admits to Maja that she really doesn't know her husband. She doesn't know anything about his family. He doesn't want to talk about where he's from. Then the wife shows Maja her wedding ring, which has the Star of David in it.
Her name's Rachel.
Rachel's
Jewish.
Rachel's Jewish, and she has this ring. So Maya's like, oh, he got that from killing Jews. So she goes back to her house and chops off Carl's ring finger to take the ring off. And he also has a Star of David in there. So she is 100% convinced that he is who she thinks he is. Ultimately, she tells her husband, listen, if he won't admit to me, because she says, all I want from him is to acknowledge that he is who I think he is. Also, she's been struggling with the idea that, because her memory of the incident is she has some blank spots because of the trauma. She's 100% sure it's him.
Right.
But she has blocked out the part because she thinks that maybe she abandoned her sister.
Yeah, she's concerned with the fact that maybe she ran away and fled the scene rather than help her sister.
Right.
But she can't remember.
So all she wants to know is, did I stay with my sister or did I run off? But Carl won't admit that he's Carl. So she's like, well, I'm going to kill him or he's going to admit it. So the husband says, all right, we got to go take him somewhere to bury him. So they drive off to the middle of nowhere. They have a little final scene where she's threatening him. But then in what I thought was a very good scene, she kind of explains why it's important to her, in an emotional way, that she just needs to know that she didn't abandon her sister. And Carl breaks. He says, you didn't. You were there. He's like, we thought we had shot everyone, including you. We thought you were dead, but obviously you weren't, and you didn't leave your sister. So Maja breaks down, seemingly content with what she's found out. She had a gun pointing at him, but she had dropped it. Well, Lewis picked the gun up and shot and killed Carl.
Yeah.
And then the end of the film is them, it looks like a 4th of July celebration. And Carl's wife is there. She obviously doesn't know anything about this. And they kind of exchange pleasantries, and that's it. All right.
Now that I think about it, the two film references, because North by Northwest is on the marquee, and there's this narrative has the potential to be kind of Hitchcockian. But Sleeping Beauty is an odd metaphor here, because she's this woman that has been asleep that is awoken by...
Interesting.
But not true love, obviously, but
yeah.
but the implications of it are kind of troubling, with how she is able to kind of finally wake up and start being herself. Her husband doesn't even know who she is, ostensibly.
So the two films that this reminded me of were Death and the Maiden.
Yeah, which is
Which is an excellent film.
which is is tied for my favorite film of all time, actually. But yeah,
And another Noomi Rapace film
called Angel of Mine,
called Angel of
which
Mine.
is a remake of a French film.
And in that film, her character lost her son. She thinks her son died during birth
In a hospital fight.
in a hospital fire. But then one day she sees...
A boy.
Is it a boy or a girl?
I don't remember. She sees
A child. She sees a child, like a 8 or 9-year-old, and she's like, "That's my child." And same thing. She kind of goes through like stalking this. It's a very similar plot.
It is similar.
And in the end, she finds out that actually is her son, and that another mom in the hospital stole the baby during the fire.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so this film reminds me of those. I think the story's very strong, but it's bogged down by a lot. So I think we can compare it to Death and the Maiden.
Death and the Maiden is definitely a template either the director or screenwriter saw, which is based on a popular play by Ariel Dorfman. Like Glenn Close won a Tony on Broadway for that, and of course Sigourney Weaver starred in the role of Blanche.
So the basic story about Death and the Maiden is Sigourney Weaver's character thinks she has found the man who had tortured and raped her years prior.
And she's one of the disappeared from Pinochet's Chile.
So she captures him and basically like interrogates and tortures him until he admits it.
Mm-hmm.
So why I thought that film is so strong is it's very intimate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as the audience, I was watching it the first time like, we're all in this together and no one's going to bed until we find out the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it so great. But this film, the scope of it's a little too large to feel fully invested, and also the time frame, because several days pass with this man stuck in the basement. And then we get a lot of like flashbacks from the memories that Maja's having about the time in the camp, which I think breaks it up in a way that takes me out of what's happening.
I think she wasn't in a camp, to be clear. They were sleeping in some abandoned building or something when these drunk Nazis stumbled on them.
Oh, sure.
Which might...
Okay, that makes more sense.
Sure.
But yeah, she keeps flashing back to that.
And the thing that does is also make it less ambiguous about her trauma. Whereas in Death and the Maiden, you don't see any flashbacks. You only have her word to go on, and we don't really know how unbalanced she is.
That's my other point. The reason Death and the Maiden is so good to me is because obviously the big question is this the man?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this the man she thinks it is? But because of the intensity of the storytelling and the environment, it's almost like I was taken on a ride. And I really, at the end, it really wouldn't matter if it is or it isn't the man, kind of.
Yeah.
But in this film, I just felt like for the entire 90 minutes, I just wanted to know, like, well, is it Carl or not? I even said, like, at the 40-minute mark, like, I could turn this off and you could just tell me if it's Carl or not.
That said, I think Noomi Rapace does do some really good work here.
She does.
As she usually does. But the confrontation scene where Joel Kinnaman finally breaks down, I thought was really well done. It's a very empathetic scene, thinking that her motivation is really about whether she ran away or not, which I found very moving.
Yeah.
Chris Messina does fine work. Amy Seimetz, who we just reviewed the film she directed.
Which was what?
She Dies Tomorrow.
About people thinking they're going to... Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Die tomorrow.
So she's interesting. She used her as the... she's done a ton of very strong indie work, but I think you saw her in the Pet Sematary remake as the wife.
Okay.
I think it's also notable... Joel Kinnaman and Noomi Rapace are both Swedish, and they both previously starred as Russians in Daniel Espinosa's Child 44, about a Russian child serial killer.
No.
Everybody's speaking accented English in that, but that's actually a pretty good film too. That's worth watching, despite that fact. But yeah, the flashback scenes I think do look a little chintzy, but other than that, I was compelled. As much as this even reminded me of a favorite film of mine, I was still invested.
I was, and for that I would give it 3 out of 5 stars.
I think 3 out of 5 is fair.
Anything else?
No.
All right, bye.
Bye.